The cold was not just in the air, it was in the bones of the house, in the silence between words spoken at the table. Elara sat, her hands folded in her lap, feeling the rough grain of the wool in her skirt. The smell of yesterday's cabbage soup still hung in the room, a thin, sour ghost of a meal. Across from her, her stepmother's voice was a steady, sharp rhythm, like a needle tapping glass. The task was simple, they said, impossible, she knew. Finish the weaving for the merchant's order by the week's end, or find your belongings on the street. The loom in the corner was not just wood and thread, it was a countdown. Each empty space on the warp was a day closer to having nowhere to go. This is where the story does not begin with a casting out into the snow. It begins with a locking in. The cruelty is not an exile, it is an enclosure. The door is not shut behind you, it is shut in front of you, and the key is a piece of work you cannot possibly do. The injustice is not in being sent away, it is in being given a purpose designed to break you, to make you leave yourself. The question they never ask the girl at the loom is not can you do this, but what will you become if you try? The market standard was the merchant's demand for a tapestry of such intricate, minute detail that 3 master weavers had already refused it. Citing the ruin of their eyesight, the standard was not about beauty, it was about consumption. It was about what could be extracted before the resource, in this case a pair of young eyes and patient hands, was used up and discarded. For the young adult listening now, facing their own version of this loom, the mechanism is familiar, the impossible deadline. The quality benchmark that moves just as you reach it, the burnout that is not an accident but the point. The personal cost is immediate, and it is a theft of time. Not just the hours at the frame, which are long and bleed into the night, but the time for thought, for rest, for the quiet maintenance of a self. Elara's fingers, even now in the relative peace of the evening, ached with a dull, remembered thrum. They knew the shape of the shuttle, the pull of the weft, the particular soreness that comes not from a day's labor, but from a lifetime's worth compressed into a week. The cost is also a theft of voice. To accept the task is to enter a bargain where your own assessment of reality is the first casualty. You know the work cannot be done, they insist it must be. To speak your truth is to be labeled lazy, incapable, ungrateful for the opportunity, so you are silent. The silence is where the real work begins. It is in that silence, as she looked from her stepmother's satisfied face to the monstrous, half-empty loom, that the core question formed not as words, but as a cold, solid feeling in her chest. Is this terrifying obstacle a barrier, or is it the only way to get the weapon you need? A barrier keeps you from what you want. A weapon is what you use to get it. The tapestry was impossible, therefore, to attempt it was to court failure, humiliation, destitution. This is the surface reading. The deeper logic, the one the old tales understood, is that the very impossibility is the signal. When the system presents you with a task that cannot be done by the rules you know, it is not asking you to fail, it is asking you to change the rules. It is asking you to leave, not to run away, but to advance toward the only source of the new rules, the new skills, the impossible competence. For Elara, staring at the intricate pattern she was to copy, a pattern of such complexity it seemed to swim before her eyes. The weapon was not in the finished cloth, the weapon was in the knowledge of how to make it. That knowledge did not live in this house, in this town, under the rule of the merchant and the smile of her stepmother. It lived according to the whispers that were never quite whispers in the deep woods, with the witch. The personal cost, then, is the cost of the journey. It is the admission that what you have, who you are here, is insufficient. It is the terrifying trade of a known misery for an unknown terror, but the old tales sent children to the witch for a reason. They did not send them to be eaten, they sent them to be forged. The first layer of analysis at the personal scale is this: the moment of the impossible task is the moment of diagnosis. It is the system revealing its intent to consume you. Your response determines everything. You can break against it and be discarded. You can accept a smaller, broken version of yourself to barely meet it and be depleted. Or you can see the task for what it is, a death sentence for the person you are now, and thus the only possible birth canal for the person you will need to become to survive. Elara rose from the table. Her legs felt stiff. The sound of her chair scraping the stone floor was loud in the quiet room. She did not look at her stepmother. She looked at the loom. It was no longer a countdown. It was a map. The pattern was not a demand. It was a set of coordinates. It was the first page of a manual she did not yet know how to read, but she knew where the library was. The cold of the coming decision was different from the cold of the house. It was clean. It was sharp. It was the feeling of a blade being picked up, handle first. The hook is not in the action. It is in the realization. The tension is in the space between knowing you must go and taking the first step. The personal cost has been tallied. The account is empty. Now the only currency that matters is competence, and that you must go into the dark to earn. The morning after the decision was not marked by fanfare or dramatic farewells. It was marked by the same grey light through the same small window, the same chill on the floorboards under bare feet. Elara moved through the rituals of the house with a new kind of attention, as if memorizing a place she was already leaving. The smell of the hearth, the particular way the kettle whistled, the sound of her stepmother's measured footsteps overhead. These were not just the details of a life, they were the boundaries of a self that was about to be dismantled. This chapter is relief, not from the tension, but into it. It is the grounding before the step into the dark. It exists at the personal layer, where psychology lives in the texture of wool and the taste of thin porridge. She worked at the loom, not with the frantic energy of yesterday's despair, but with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Her fingers traced the pattern, not trying to solve it, but learning its language. The blue thread here, the gold there, the impossible knot of colors in the center that seemed to demand a third hand to weave. The touch of the yarn was familiar, the rough hemp of the warp, the slightly softer wool of the weft, but today she felt the history in it. The sheep that grew the wool, the hens that spun it, the cart that brought it to market. The tapestry was not just a task, it was a chain of labor, and she was the last, most fragile link. She thought of the merchant who ordered it, not as a villain in a story, but as a function in a system. His demand created the pressure that flowed down through her stepmother, through the household economy, and into her sore shoulders. This was the societal layer pressing on the personal, but in this moment of relief we do not analyze it, we feel its weight. We smell its particular scent, which was not just cabbage soup, but the faint, metallic odor of anxiety that seems to seep from the walls when money is too tight and time is too short. Outside, the world went on. The sound of the blacksmith's hammer across the square, regular as a heartbeat, the cry of the fishmonger. The laughter of children who did not yet know about looms and merchants. These sounds were the texture of normalcy, and they made her decision feel both monstrous and perfectly ordinary. Who leaves a warm house, however cold the people in it, for a witch in the woods? Only someone who has calculated the warmth and found it lacking. Only someone who understands that the true cold is not in the temperature, but in the absence of growth. In the afternoon she walked to the well. This was allowed. It was part of her duties. The path was hard, packed earth, lined with stones worn smooth by generations of feet. The well's stone rim was cool and damp under her palms. The bucket made its familiar hollow splash, and the rope burned a little as she hauled it up. This was real work, muscle work, and it felt clean compared to the intricate, mind-breaking work at the loom. Here, effort matched result. A full bucket of water. At the loom, effort met a wall of complexity. As she turned to go back, she saw the dog. It was a rangy, mud-colored thing lying in the shadow of the cooper's shed. One ear was torn. It watched her with the still, assessing gaze of a creature that knows the value of everything and the kindness of almost no one. She did not approach it, she did not speak to it. But she tipped the bucket just a little, letting a small stream of clear, cold water spill onto the ground near it. The dog did not move at first. Then it crept forward, lapped once, twice, and looked at her again. This was not the helper moment, not yet. This was the precondition for it. Kindness in these stories is never a grand gesture. It is the leftover resource, the scrap of attention, the water you can afford to spill. It is what you do when you are at your own limit and you recognize another limit nearby. It is the quiet virtue that has nothing to do with survival and everything to do with what is worth surviving for. She carried the water back. The house absorbed it as it absorbed all labor. The evening was the same as the last and the one before that, the same thin stew, the same critical silence. The same loom waiting in the corner like a sleeping beast. But something had shifted, not in the house, but in her. The decision was no longer a cold, sharp blade in her chest. It had warmed to a resolve. It had become a plan. The plan was simple. She would go at first light. She would take nothing that was not unquestionably hers, a cloak, a knife for the path. The small, hard loaf of bread that was her share, and that she had saved from yesterday and today by eating less. She would leave the loom, the half-finished tapestry, the merchant's demand, the stepmother's satisfaction. She would walk into the woods and ask the witch for the secret of the weave. She would trade the certainty of failure here for the uncertain tutelage there. This is the deep breath before the plunge. The relief chapter allows the listener to settle into the protagonist's skin, to feel the mundane reality that makes the extraordinary journey necessary. It answers the question of why anyone would ever go to the witch. Not because they are brave, but because the alternative, the daily, grinding, invisible violence of the impossible task, has become a slower, more certain death. The woods are a risk, the witch is a terror, but they are unknowns. The loom in the corner with its pattern of defeat is a known quantity. And in the economy of survival, known misery is often more frightening than unknown danger, because known misery has no end, it just has tomorrow. So she sat by the fire, mending a tear in her cloak. The touch of the needle, the pull of the thread, these were small competencies. They would have to be enough. The sound of the wind outside was rising, hinting at the wildness beyond the town's edge. She listened to it, and for the first time, it did not sound like a threat. It sounded like an invitation. Let us examine the mechanism. The impossible task did not originate in that house. It flowed downstream. The merchant's demand was itself a response. To what? To the market. This is the societal layer. This is where we analyze the core logic. The tapestry was to be a gift for a visiting dignitary. A display of the town's wealth and craftsmanship, not real wealth, the appearance of wealth, the appearance of craftsmanship. The merchant needed a masterpiece that would be seen, admired, and forgotten, all within the span of a banquet. The value was in the momentary impression, not in the years of labor the impression represented. This is the first mechanism, the decoupling of value from substance. The market standard becomes about output that signals excellence, not output that is excellent. The difference is critical. Real excellence has limits. It respects the material, the body, the time. Signal excellence has only one limit. Can you make something that looks like it defied limits? The answer is usually yes if you break something, usually the worker. The societal structure is engineered to find that individual and press until they break or produce the signal. Now we reach the third mechanism. The transformation of the task into a personal test. The language used is never about economics. It is about character. You are not being exploited. You are being given a chance to prove your worth. The impossible deadline is a challenge to your dedication. The intricate, eye-destroying detail is a test of your skill. This is how the system maintains itself. It frames structural exploitation as personal opportunity. It makes your failure to thrive a failure of virtue. For the young adult facing burnout, this translation is immediate. The 80-hour week is not a predatory business model. It is a test of your commitment. The ever-increasing performance metrics are not a moving goalpost designed to extract more for less. They are a chance for you to grow. The system presents the poison and calls it medicine, and if you spit it out, you are the problem. You lack grit. You lack passion. You are not a team player. Let us be surgical. The societal layer creates the conditions for the witch, not as a fantasy, but as a logical necessity. When all legitimate paths to competence are blocked by demands that destroy the practitioner, the only path left is the illegitimate one. The path outside the system, the woods, the witch. The old tales understood this. They did not send the lazy to the witch. They sent the competent to the witch. They sent the ones who had hit the ceiling of what their society could teach them, because their society was only interested in extracting their labor, not developing their skill. Baba Yaga's hut on chicken legs is not just a fairy tale image. It is a metaphor for a learning environment that is mobile, unstable, and utterly separate from the village economy. It exists to create a different kind of value, not signal value, real, lethal, transformative competence. The societal analysis reveals the trap. The system offers you a bargain: stay inside, follow the rules, use the approved tools, meet the market standards. In return, you will be safe, you will be respected, you will belong. But the rules are designed so that following them consumes you. The tools are dull, the standards are impossible, the safety is the safety of the coal mine. It pays just enough to keep you coming back until the black lung gets you. The young adult knows this feeling. The paycheck that covers the rent but not the dream, the respect that feels like being patted on the head, the belonging that requires you to silence your own doubts. This is the societal cruelty. It is quieter than a stepmother's sharp words. It is the hum of normalcy. It is the sound of everyone else seeming to manage. It makes you wonder if the problem is in the loom or in your eyes. The analysis at this layer provides the why for the journey. Elara did not leave because she was weak. She left because she did the math. She calculated the exchange rate of her life for the merchant's signal of wealth. The numbers did not add up. The societal system expected her to accept the deficit, to internalize it as her own lack. The decision to go to the witch is the decision to reject that internalization. It is the decision to seek a new economy where effort purchases real skill, not just the appearance of it, where the currency is not coin, but competence. This is the dangerous, radical logic of the old tales. They suggest that when the village economy fails you, you must seek the forest economy. You must find the witch and submit to her terms. Her terms will be brutal. They will make the merchant's deadline look like a holiday, but they will be honest. The work will be real, the reward will be power, not power over others, but power over your own reality, the power to weave the impossible tapestry, or to burn the house that demanded it. The fast pacing here is deliberate. It cuts to the mechanism: subject, verb, object. The market creates demand. The demand seeks cheap resources. The individual absorbs the cost. The system frames exploitation as opportunity. The individual must choose, accept the framing and be consumed, or reject it and seek a new teacher. This is not a metaphor, it is a manual. For the listener facing their own version of this, the step is not necessarily into a physical forest. It is into the unknown territory of a new skill, a new field, a new way of working that the old system dismisses as foolish or dangerous. It is the online course your boss scoffs at. It is the side project that drains your evenings. It is the network of people outside your industry. It is the witch's hut. It stands on chicken legs because it is unstable, it might not work, you might fail. The village calls it madness. The tale calls it the only sane choice. The analysis is complete, the societal machine has been laid bare, it grinds individuals into signals of success. Ilara has stepped off the conveyor belt. She is walking toward the grinding wheel itself to learn how it is made, to learn how to stop it. The connection happens in the body first. Ilara stood at the edge of the town where the cobblestones gave way to hard, packed earth, and the earth gave way to the first dark line of trees. The societal analysis was complete in her mind, a clean, cold map of the machine that had pressed her here. But the personal reality was in her lungs, in the tightness of her chest as she took the first step off the known path. This is integration. We connect the dots between the system and the self. The slow pacing allows the feeling to settle. The decision was no longer theoretical. It was in the weight of the small pack on her back, in the feel of the bread wrapped in cloth, already growing stale. It was in the absence of the loom's constant, accusing presence at the edge of her vision. She had traded a known enemy for an unknown one, and the relief was immediate and terrifying. It was the relief of a prisoner who has soared through the bars and now faces the open night. The forest was not silent, it was full of sound. The wind in the high branches was a different creature from the wind in the town square. It was a long, low sigh that spoke of distance and depth. The crunch of her own footsteps on fallen leaves was loud, a proclamation of her intrusion. Small creatures rustled in the undergrowth, stopping when she stopped. This was the first lesson of the new environment. You are heard, you are seen. Your presence changes things. In the town, her presence was a utility, a weaver at a loom, a pair of hands carrying water. Here, she was simply a body moving through space, and the space reacted. This integration is crucial. It marks the shift from being an object within a system to being a subject within an ecology. The town's system wanted a specific output. The forest's ecology simply registered her input. There was no task here, only consequence. She walked for what felt like hours, though the sun through the dense canopy made time strange. The light was green and fractured. The air grew cooler, damper, carrying the smell of wet earth and decaying wood and something else, a sharp, clean scent like pine resin. Her thoughts, which had been a storm of analysis and fear, began to quiet. They were replaced by sensation. The ache in her legs from climbing a gentle slope, the cool touch of a fern brushing her hand, the distant call of a bird she did not recognize. This was the grounding of the body, and it was a form of healing. The constant, low-grade panic of the impossible task had been a vibration in her nerves. Here, the demands were physical, immediate, and within her capacity. Find a path, do not trip, keep moving. This was competence she already possessed. It was a foundation. As the day wore on, the theoretical connection between societal pressure and personal despair became a lived truth. The memory of the loom was not a thought. It was a phantom pain in her shoulders. The sound of her stepmother's voice was not a memory. It was a flinch in her gut when a branch snapped unexpectedly. The system had written itself into her body. The journey to the witch, then, was not just a search for new knowledge. It was a process of unwriting, of walking until the vibrations of the old place faded from her muscles, of breathing air that did not smell of cabbage and anxiety. This is the personal layer of integration. Ilara stopped by a small, clear stream. The water was icy. She drank from her cupped hands, the cold a shock that cleared her head. She ate a piece of the hard bread. It was dry and difficult to swallow, but it was fuel. This was another integration, the recognition of resources. In the house, resources were given or withheld. Here they were found. The water was there for the taking. The path was there for the walking. The competence to use them was hers. This is a fundamental shift in agency. She was no longer a consumer of allocated scarcity. She was a forager in a world of potential abundance, if she had the skill to recognize it. And she was learning. As dusk began to gather, the green light deepening to gray, the reality of the night ahead presented itself. This was the next dot to connect. The analysis said the forest was the alternative to the system. The personal reality was that the forest was cold and dark, and she was alone. The fear returned, but it was a cleaner fear. It was not the fear of failing a meaningless task. It was the fear of a real wolf, of a real fall, of real exposure. This fear had dignity. It was proportional to the stakes. She found a relatively dry spot under the broad roots of an ancient tree. She wrapped herself in her cloak. The wool was rough against her cheek. The sounds of the forest changed as the light died. The sighing wind remained, but it was joined by other noises, scrabbling. A distant howl that was not a wolf, but something else. The dark was absolute. She could not see her own hand in front of her face. This was the final integration of the day. The connection between the choice she made at dawn and the reality she inhabited at night. The system she left offered a roof, however cold the people under it. The forest offered no such contract. It offered truth. The truth was she was small, and the night was large, and her survival until morning was not guaranteed. It was a problem to be solved with her own wits and will. She curled tighter, listening to her own heartbeat. It was fast but steady. She was afraid, but she was not despairing. There was a strange clarity in this. In the house, her fear had been a form of paralysis. Here, it was a form of focus. It told her what to pay attention to, every sound, every shift in the air. This was the beginning of a new kind of competence. Not the competence to weave a pattern, but the competence to stay alive. It was the most basic skill, and it had been buried under years of domestic tasks and societal expectations. The witch, she realized, might not teach her to weave at all. She might simply force her to remember how to be an animal, a clever, careful, surviving animal. And perhaps that was the first and most important lesson. The thread was connected. The societal machine had spit her out. The personal self was walking through the consequences. The destination was still unknown. The path was under her feet. The night was long. She closed her eyes not to sleep, but to listen better. The integration was complete. She was no longer a weaver from the town. She was not yet the witch's student. She was something in between. A creature in transition, and for now that was enough. The dawn came not with a sudden light, but with a slow leaching of the dark from gray to pale green. Ilara uncurled from her nest of roots, every muscle stiff with cold and tension. The forest floor was damp, and the smell of wet earth and decaying leaves was strong in the cool air. She stood slowly, her cloak heavy with moisture, and listened. The night sounds had retreated, replaced by the tentative chirping of waking birds and the steady drip of water from leaves high above. She ate the last of her bread, the crust so hard she had to soften it with a sip of water from the stream. The hunger was a hollow, familiar feeling, but it was clean. It was her hunger for her food, earned by her journey, not a portion grudgingly given. She washed her face in the icy stream, the shock of it sharpening her mind, washing away the last clinging threads of sleep. The water was so clear she could see the smooth, dark stones at the bottom, and her own reflection, pale and wide-eyed, looking back at her from another world. She filled a water skin, the leather cold and supple in her hands. The task was simple, physical, complete. She turned from the stream and looked deeper into the woods. The trees grew closer together here, their trunks thick and gnarled, their canopy so dense the light that filtered through was the color of old moss. The path, if it had ever been one, was gone. Now there was only direction. She began to walk, her pace slow, her eyes scanning the ground for roots and stones, her ears tuned to the space around her. The forest here had a different quality. The air was stiller, heavier, carrying the scent of mushrooms and damp stone. The sound of her footsteps was muffled by a thick carpet of pine needles. The birdsong grew sparser, replaced by the occasional creak of a branch high above, a sound like an old door swinging on a rusty hinge. This was not a place for people, this was a place that had forgotten people, and that was the point. The relief chapter allows the listener to breathe, to settle into the sensory reality of the journey. To feel the rough bark of a tree she leans against to rest, the cool smoothness of a mushroom cap she brushes with her fingers but does not pick. To hear the distant, lonely call of a bird she will never see. She is becoming a creature of the forest, not by choice but by immersion. Her thoughts, when they come, are simple. Where is the next stream? Is that a safe place to rest? How much daylight is left? These are ancient thoughts. They have nothing to do with looms or merchants or stepmothers. They are the thoughts of survival, and they are a profound relief. She found a patch of late, ripening berries, dark blue and tart. She ate them carefully, one by one, remembering stories of poison. They stained her fingers purple, the juice was sharp and clean on her tongue. This was foraging, this was competence, small, incremental, vital. As the afternoon deepened, she came to a clearing, not a natural one. The trees had been pushed back, their stumps blackened and old. In the center stood a single, massive oak, its branches spreading like a dark hand against the sky. And at its base, nestled among roots as thick as her body, was a pile of stones. It was too regular to be natural, a cairn, a marker. She approached slowly. The stones were moss-covered, ancient. Someone had been here, someone had made this. She touched the top stone. It was cold and solid. This was the first human sign she had seen since leaving the town, and it filled her not with comfort, but with a deeper kind of awe. It was a message. It said, I was here, I survived this place, and I left this so you would know. She added a small stone of her own to the pile, pressing it into the moss. The gesture felt important. It was a promise. I am here too, I am following. The light was fading now, the green gloom of the forest deepening towards twilight. She knew she should find shelter, but the cairn held her. It was a story without words. It told her the witch was real. It told her the path, though invisible, was known. It told her she was not the first and would not be the last. This was the emotional core of the relief, not safety but connection, a thread through time. She turned from the cairn and saw, between two particularly close, set pines, a faint, almost imperceptible game trail leading deeper into the darkest part of the woods. It was not an invitation, it was an observation. Animals passed here. She could follow. She took a deep breath, the air cold in her lungs, and stepped onto the narrow path. The relief was over. The grounding was complete. She was as ready as she would ever be. The forest closed around her, and she walked into the gathering dark. The hut was not on chicken legs. That was a metaphor for the villagers who could not understand its foundation. It stood on a thicket of gnarled roots at the edge of a black, still pond. The walls were made of woven branches and dried mud, the roof a thatch of reeds so thick it seemed to swallow sound. A thin tendril of smoke rose from a hole in the center, straight up into the windless air. The smell was not of rot, but of intense, concentrated life. Herbs drying, mushrooms curing, wet clay, and beneath it all, the iron scent of the pond water. This was the destination. Now we analyze the system she has entered, the witch's domain. This is analysis at the systemic layer. We examine the abstract rules of this new place, the fast pacing returns, cut the fat. The hut was a system of brutal competence. Every element had a purpose. The reeds for the roof came from the pond, filtering the water. The herbs by the door were for medicine, for poison, for dye. The clay daubing the walls was sealant and insulation. There was no decoration, only function. This was the first rule: utility is the only virtue. The second rule was written in the clearing itself. Nothing grew near the hut. The ground was bare, hard, packed earth. This was not neglect, it was defense. No cover for predators, no fuel for fire, a clear field of view. The system was designed for a single occupant's survival against all threats. The third rule was in the silence. No birds sang here, no squirrels chattered, the pond did not ripple. The system had eliminated all variables it could not control. It had achieved a terrible, efficient equilibrium. Elara stood at the tree line, watching. This was the analysis phase. She was not yet a participant. She was an observer of the mechanism. The merchant's system had been about extraction. It consumed resources to produce signals of wealth. This system was about autonomy. It consumed nothing from outside. It produced only what was necessary for its own continuation. It was a closed loop. The witch was not a villain in this system. She was its engine, its maintainer, its sole beneficiary and its only possible victim. To enter this system was to volunteer to become a component, a temporary, hopefully useful component. The tales said Baba Yaga gave impossible tasks: separate a mountain of grain from a mountain of sand, weave a cloak from nettles. These were not punishments. They were diagnostics. They tested the applicant's understanding of systems. Could you see the difference between two similar things? Could you handle pain for a worthwhile result? Could you follow instructions exactly? The tasks filtered out the foolish, the impatient, the entitled. They selected for the one quality the system valued above all: teachability. The systemic analysis reveals the twist. The witch is not the antagonist of the hero's journey. She is the quality control for the school. Her cruelty is the tuition. Her impossible tasks are the entrance exam. For the young adult facing impossible market standards, the translation is direct. The burnout job is the village system. It extracts your labor for signals. The witch's hut is the alternative path. The coding bootcamp that breaks your social life. The apprenticeship that pays in knowledge, not coin. The graduate program that consumes your 20s. These are systems of brutal competence. They have no room for your comfort. They test you. They filter you. They demand everything. And if you pass, they give you the only thing that matters in any system: leverage, the power to change your circumstances, not through magic. Through skill, so refined it looks like magic to those who don't have it. Elara took a step forward. The hard earth of the clearing was different under her feet. It was not welcoming, it was assessing. The door of the hut, a slab of dark wood bound with iron, swung inward before she reached it. No hand was visible. The interior was dark. The smell intensified: dried thyme, crushed mint, the sour tang of fermentation, the smoky residue of 1,000 small fires. A voice came from the darkness. It was not a cackle. It was dry, like pages turning. Why are you here? Elara did not speak of the loom, the merchant, the stepmother. Those were village problems. She spoke to the system. I cannot weave what I need to weave. I need to learn. The silence that followed was long. It was the system processing her input. Then the voice again: what will you pay? This was the core of the systemic contract. The village traded time for money. The witch traded everything for knowledge. Elara had nothing but her own labor. I will work. The door swung wider. Enter. The analysis was over. She had passed the first filter. She had stated her need in terms the system understood: a deficit of skill. She had offered the correct currency, labor. She crossed the threshold. The systemic layer closed around her. The rules here were absolute. They would break her or remake her. There was no third option. This is the new layer of implication. The village system threatened her with destitution. This system threatened her with annihilation of the self. It would strip away everything she thought she knew, everything she thought she was, and rebuild her from the foundation. For the listener, this is the cost of true competence. You must surrender your old identity, the comfortable story of who you are. You must become a student. Empty, hungry, willing to be wrong, the hut was not a place. It was a curriculum, and class was now in session. The inside of the hut was a single room, dominated by a large, cold hearth and a loom, not the familiar upright loom of the village. This was a different beast. It was low to the ground, its frame made of dark, polished wood, its warp threads so fine they seemed to be made of light itself. The witch was a shape in the corner, wrapped in a shawl the color of ash. Her face was in shadow, but her hands were visible, long, fingered and restless, sorting through a basket of raw wool. She did not look up. Your first task, clean the wool, not card it, clean it, remove every burr, every speck of dirt, every stray bit of vegetation with your hands. Elara looked at the basket. It was large, the wool matted and filthy. It would take days. She did not ask why. She sat on the hard earth floor, pulled the basket toward her, and began. This is integration. We connect the dots between the systemic analysis and the personal experience. The slow pacing allows for the feeling of the work. The wool was greasy, stiff with lanolin and dirt. It smelled of sheep and field and rain. Her fingers quickly grew sore, the rough fibers catching on her skin. She worked methodically, pulling apart clumps, picking out tiny thorns and bits of straw. The task was monotonous, physically demanding, and seemingly pointless. She was a weaver. She knew how to card wool to prepare it for spinning. This was something else. This was not preparation. This was purification. Hour after hour, her world narrowed to the feel of the wool, the growing pile of clean white fluff beside her, the aching in her back and shoulders. The witch moved silently around the hut, tending the fire, grinding herbs in a stone mortar, the sound a rhythmic crunch. She offered no praise, no criticism, no conversation. The only communication was the work itself. This was the integration of the systemic rule. Utility is the only virtue. Her utility, in this moment, was to clean wool. Her thoughts, her feelings, her past were irrelevant. They were noise. The system demanded action, output. As the light from the single small window faded, Elara's hands began to bleed. Tiny cuts from the thorns, cracks from the dry wool and the constant friction. She did not stop. She looked at her hands, the blood dark against the white wool, and understood. This was part of the lesson. The merchant's task had threatened to ruin her eyes. This task ruined her hands, but there was a difference. The merchant's task would have left her broken and discarded. This task was breaking her to rebuild her. The pain was not a side effect. It was the material. She was learning the true cost of the cloth, not in coin, but in flesh. This integration connects the personal sacrifice to the systemic goal. The village system hid the cost. The witch's system made it explicit, visceral, unavoidable. You will pay with your body. You will understand what you are making from the ground up. Literally, when the last of the wool was clean, her hands were a map of small wounds. The witch came over, looked at the basket, looked at her hands. She said nothing. She pointed to a corner where a thin pallet of straw and a rough blanket lay. Sleep. Tomorrow you spin. Elara lay down. The straw prickled through her clothes. The blanket smelled of dust and old wool. Her hands throbbed. She was exhausted, hungry, and in pain. And yet she felt a strange, clear satisfaction. The task was complete. She had done it. There was no ambiguity. The wool was clean. This was a kind of truth the village never offered. effort had a direct, visible result. The integration was deepening. The systemic demand for pure utility was meeting her personal need for meaningful work. The work was hard, but it was real. It was not a signal, it was substance. For the young adult facing burnout, this is the feeling of the first real project after leaving the soul-crushing job. It is exhausting, it pays little or nothing, but it is yours. You see the beginning, the middle, and the end. You understand the chain of cause and effect. Your effort is not lost in a corporate machine. It is right there in the clean code, the finished cabinet, the healed patient. This is the integration phase. It is where the theory of the witch's school becomes the practice of bleeding fingers and a completed basket. It is where Elara stops being a victim of systems and starts becoming a practitioner within one, a bad one at first, a slow, clumsy, painful practitioner. But a practitioner nonetheless. She fell asleep to the sound of the witch spinning, the whir of the spindle, a soft, relentless song in the dark. Her hands hurt, her back ached, her stomach was empty, and for the first time in a long time her mind was quiet. There was no room for anxiety about the future. The future was tomorrow's spinning. There was no room for regret about the past. The past was the dirty wool, now clean. There was only the present, the ache, the song of the spindle, the smell of herbs and cold ashes. Why did ancient cultures send their youth away? Not to safe apprenticeships in the next village, to the edge of the known world, to the hermit in the cave, to the shaman in the forest, to the witch in the hut. This is analysis at the historical layer. We pull back from the personal story of Elara's bleeding hands to see the long human pattern. The fast pacing continues. Subject, verb, object. The pattern is universal. The initiate leaves the tribe. The initiate faces an ordeal. The initiate returns transformed or does not return at all. This is not a fairy tale quirk. It is a cultural technology, a deliberate, brutal method for producing competent adults. The village could teach the child how to weave a simple cloth, how to tend a common field. It could not teach them how to survive a famine, how to negotiate with a hostile tribe, how to innovate when the old ways failed. For that, you needed a teacher who lived outside the village's consensus, a teacher who understood the deeper rules. The rules of survival, of power, of reality itself. The historical analysis reveals the first cost. The tribe must risk its young. It must send its best and brightest into the unknown, knowing some will not come back. This is an investment in the future, paid for with present loss. The second cost is borne by the initiate. They must surrender their identity as a member of the tribe. They must become an outsider, a stranger, even to themselves. This is the death of the child's self. The historical record is clear. These ordeals were often framed as symbolic deaths. The youth died to the village and was reborn through the initiation. This is not metaphor. It was a psychological reset. The old loyalties, the old fears, the old limitations were burned away in the crucible of the ordeal. What remained was a core of competence unattached to the opinions of the crowd. Now connect this to the witch. Baba Yaga is not a historical figure. She is an archetype. She represents the initiator, the one who administers the ordeal. Her hut on chicken legs is the liminal space. Not quite of the village, not quite of the wild, the place where the old self is dismantled. Her impossible tasks are the historical ordeal updated for an agrarian society. Separate the grain from the sand, weave a cloak from nettles. These are not just tests of skill. They are tests of will, of patience, of the ability to see solutions where none seem to exist. They filter for the kind of mind a tribe needs in a crisis, a mind that does not give up, a mind that finds a way. For the young adult today, the historical layer reframes their burnout. The modern corporate world has largely abandoned formal initiation. It offers no ordeal, no clear path to mastery, no symbolic death and rebirth. It offers only endless, grinding consumption of your time and energy. It calls this a career, but the human need for initiation remains, so we seek our own witches. We sign up for the marathon that breaks our body. We start the business that risks our savings. We pursue the advanced degree that isolates us for years. These are self-administered ordeals. They are attempts to fill the initiation gap, to prove to ourselves that we are competent, that we can endure, that we have transformed from the uncertain youth into someone capable. The historical analysis provides the why. We are wired for this. We need the trial. Without it, we feel untested, unreal, perpetually adolescent in a world that demands adult competence. The village, the modern society, wants to skip the ordeal. It wants to give you a manual and a title, but competence cannot be conferred, it must be earned. Through failure, through pain, through the long, lonely hours of practice when no one is watching. The witch, in her historical role, is the guardian of this truth. She will not give you the secret until you have paid the price. She is the quality control for adulthood. Now, back to Illyra. Her bleeding hands are not just a personal trial. They are her entry in the historical ledger. She is one of thousands, millions across time, who have sat in a dim room with a menial, painful task, because on the other side of that task lies a new self. A self that can do what others cannot. The historical layer gives her suffering meaning. It connects her to the lineage of smiths who burned their hands, of sailors who lost their bearings, of healers who caught the plague from their patients. Competence has always been bought with the body, with time, with isolation. The village hides this cost. The witch makes you count it, coin by bloody coin. This is the new layer of implication. The ordeal is not an accident, it is the point. The terrifying obstacle is not a barrier to the life you want. It is the ritual that creates the person who can have that life. The merchant's impossible tapestry was a fake ordeal. It led to breakdown, not breakthrough. The witch's impossible tasks are the real thing. They lead to capability. The historical analysis concludes with a question for the listener. Where is your witch? What is your ordeal? Is the thing you are avoiding, the terrifying obstacle in your path, actually the initiation you need? The thing that will, if you survive it, give you the fire to burn down the cages you did not even know you were in. Illyra knows nothing of this history. She knows only the spinning wheel she will face tomorrow and the ache in her hands today, but she is part of the pattern now. A thread in the long, dark tapestry of human becoming. The historical layer has been revealed, the cost is clear, the reward is transformation. The choice was made long ago by our ancestors. They sent the children to the witch, not to be cruel, to make them strong enough to come back and change everything. The spinning wheel was ancient, its wood dark with the oil of 10,000 hands. The witch pointed to it, then to the basket of clean wool. Spin all of it. Thread fine enough to pass through the eye of the needle on the shelf. She pointed to a small, rusted needle stuck in a beam. Its eye was a pinprick of darkness. Illyra sat, her hands were stiff, the cuts from yesterday pulsing with a dull heat. She took a handful of wool, tried to remember the rhythm from the village. Draft, twist, wind, the wheel resisted. The thread she made was lumpy, thick, uneven. It broke. She started again. It broke again. The witch watched from the hearth, saying nothing. The smell of the hut was the same, herbs, wool, cold ash. But now there was a new sound. The frustrated whir of the wheel, the snap of the thread, the soft exhalation of her own breath. This is relief. The sensory grounding in the specific, painful detail of mastering a skill. She worked for hours. The thread would not hold. Her hands, already wounded, grew clumsy. The wool seemed to fight her, to tangle just as she thought she had it. This was not like cleaning, that was monotony. This was active failure. Repeated, humiliating, obvious failure. The pile of bad thread grew beside her. The good thread, if it could be called that, was a pitiful, short length on the spindle. The light through the window moved across the floor. Her stomach growled. She was given a bowl of thin broth and a piece of hard bread at midday. She ate without tasting it, her eyes on the wheel, her hands moving automatically through the motions. Draft, twist, wind, break, start again. This was the quiet virtue, not kindness, not yet, persistence. The stubborn refusal to stop in the face of your own incompetence. It is a virtue that looks like stupidity from the outside. Why keep doing what clearly does not work? Because the alternative is to accept that you cannot learn, and that is a death sentence of a different kind. In the late afternoon, something shifted, not in the thread but in her. The frustration burned away, leaving a cold, clear focus. She stopped trying to make thread. She started listening to the wheel, to the sound it made when the tension was right, a low, steady hum. She watched the twist travel up the fibers from the spindle. She felt the point where the wool wanted to become thread, and where it wanted to fall apart. Her hands, bloody and sore, became instruments of perception. They were not just doing, they were feeling, they were learning. The next thread did not break. It was still lumpy, still too thick, but it held. It wound onto the spindle. A full arm's length of terrible, ugly, continuous thread. It was a miracle. She looked at it. She had made this. From fluff and failure, she had made a continuous line. The witch got up from the hearth. She came over, took the spindle, examined the thread. She said nothing. She took the small rusted needle from the beam. She tried to thread it. The lumpy thread would not go through. She handed the spindle back. Keep spinning. Elara looked at the thread. It was not good enough, but it was a thread. It was a start. She went back to the wheel. The feeling was different now. She was not fighting the wool. She was negotiating with it. Her hands remembered the rhythm of the good thread. They sought to reproduce it. The next length was slightly less lumpy, the next slightly finer. The process was agonizingly slow. Each improvement was microscopic, but it was there. The light faded. The witch lit a single tallow candle. The small, greasy flame threw huge, dancing shadows on the walls. Elara spun by its light. Her world was the wheel, the wool, the growing spindle of thread. The ache in her hands was a fact, like the smell of the tallow, like the sound of the wind outside. It was part of the work, not an obstacle, a component. This is the relief chapter. It lowers the heart rate not by removing tension, but by immersing the listener in the granular reality of skill acquisition. The smell of the wool, the feel of the wheel's pedal under her foot, the sound of the successful spin versus the sound of the break. The taste of the dusty air, the sight of her own blood, dried brown on her fingertips, becoming just another color in the work. For the young adult facing burnout, this is the antidote. Burnout is the feeling of effort with no visible result, of labor lost in a system. This spinning is the opposite. The effort is immense, the result is tiny, but it is visible, it is yours. You can hold it in your hand. You can see the improvement, millimeter by millimeter. This is the grounding. This is why people knit or garden or cook from scratch in the midst of a digital, abstracted life. To feel the thread form under their hands. To remember that competence is built in the body, through repetition, through failure, through the slow, patient accumulation of tiny victories. Elara spun until the candle guttered out. In the dark, her hands kept moving, finding the rhythm by touch alone. The witch said, "Sleep." She stopped. Her hands were trembling with fatigue. She lay on her pallet. The rough blanket was a blessing. She held her hands up in the dark, though she could not see them. She could feel the new calluses forming over the cuts. She could feel the memory of the good thread in her muscles. She had not woven the impossible tapestry. She had not even spun thread fine enough for the needle. But she had begun. She had passed from absolute failure to terrible proficiency. It was a vast distance. It had taken everything she had, and it was only the first step. She fell asleep with the sound of the wheel still humming in her bones. The relief was in the work itself, in the pure, unmediated struggle between her will and the wool. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. And it was the most honest. The thread grew finer. Day by day, the pile of clean wool diminished, transformed into spools of thread that ranged from terrible to passable. The witch gave no praise. She gave only the next task. Dye the thread. Here are the plants. Here are the pots. Do not mix the colors. Elara learned to boil water in a black iron pot over the fire, to steep bundles of leaves and roots and bark, to watch the clear water turn to deep blue, to rusty red, to golden yellow. The smell of the hut changed. The clean scent of herbs was joined by the acrid, mineral smell of the mordant, the earthy smell of the dyes, the sharp vinegar used to set the color. Her hands, now calloused from spinning, were stained new colors, blue under the nails, red in the cracks of her skin. This was integration. Connecting the dots between the raw material and the final product, the systemic layer. The witch's hut was not just a place of ordeal. It was a complete production system, from raw wool to colored thread. Every step controlled, every variable accounted for. The village system had compartmentalized these tasks. The shepherd raised the sheep, the carder cleaned the wool, the spinner made the thread. The dyer colored it, the weaver wove it. No one person saw the whole chain. This created fragility. It also created alienation. The weaver never felt the sheep. The shepherd never saw the tapestry. In the hut, Elara was the entire chain. She felt the cost of every step in her body. She understood the dependencies. Badly cleaned wool made lumpy thread. Lumpy thread would not take dye evenly. The system was unforgiving, but it was transparent. The next task confirmed this. Weave a sample, not on the great loom, on a small handheld frame. Use your thread. The witch gave her a simple pattern. A checkerboard of blue and red. Elara's hands, now competent at spinning and dyeing, were clumsy at the loom. The threads tangled. The tension was wrong. The pattern blurred. She unpicked her work and started again and again. This was the integration of skill. Each previous competence was a foundation for the next, more complex one. But the foundation was not enough. She had to learn the new language of the loom. The shuttle in her hand felt alien. The rhythm of beating the weft into place was a new muscle memory to build. Elara's sample, after 3 days of failure, was a small, crooked but recognizable checkerboard. The colors were uneven, the edges were frayed. But it was a cloth. She had made cloth, from wool on a sheep to cloth in her hand. The witch took it, held it up to the light, grunted. It was not praise, it was acknowledgement. The system had processed another unit of input. The student had integrated another layer of the craft. The next lesson waited. The integration is complete. The dots are connected. The personal suffering, the societal critique, the historical pattern, the systemic logic, they all converge in this small, ugly piece of cloth. It is a map. It shows the distance from where she started to where she needs to be. It is a long way, but she is on the path. The witch sent her out, not on an errand to gather more wool from the brambles at the forest's edge where the wild sheep rubbed. Elara took a sack and a hooked staff. The air outside the hut was shockingly fresh after the close, herbal atmosphere inside. She walked, her body remembering the forest paths, her mind still full of the rhythm of the loom. This was analysis at the societal layer, but from a new angle, the role of the overlooked helper. In the tales, the helper is often a simple creature, a mouse. A bird, a stray dog. They aid the hero not out of grand design, but because of a small prior kindness. The hero shares their last crust of bread. The hero tends a wounded wing. This is not a plot device. It is a sociological observation. The powerful, the stepmother, the merchant, the king, they operate within formal systems of power and exchange. The powerless, the hero, must often rely on the informal network. The marginalized, the forgotten, those who exist outside the official economy. The stray dog from the town was part of this network. Ilara had given it water, a transaction so small it was beneath notice. But in the economy of the overlooked, it was currency. She reached the bramble patch. The wool was caught on the thorns, tufts of grey and brown, mixed with leaves and dirt. It was poorer quality than the wool she had cleaned in the hut. Coarser, dirtier, she began the slow work of hooking it free, stuffing it into her sack. As she worked, she heard a whimper. She stopped, listened. It came from a thicket nearby. She approached cautiously. It was the dog. The same rangy, mud-colored creature from the town, one ear still torn. It was caught. A loop of old, rotten vine had tightened around its hind leg. It looked at her, its eyes wide with pain and fear. It did not growl. It was beyond that. This was the moment, the helper moment, but it was not magical. It was practical. The dog was a resource in distress. She could ignore it. She could kill it for food, though it was scrawny, or she could help it. She chose to help, not out of grand virtue, out of recognition. She knew what it was to be trapped by something you did not understand. She used her knife to saw through the vine. The dog flinched but did not bite. The vine snapped. The dog scrambled free, limped a few paces, then turned and looked at her. It did not come closer. It did not wag its tail. It simply looked. Then it vanished into the undergrowth. The transaction was complete. She had paid a debt of attention. The dog owed her nothing, but the network had been acknowledged. This is the societal analysis of mutual aid among the dispossessed. The powerful have contracts, the powerless have understandings. Ilara finished gathering the wool. The sack was heavy. As she turned to go, she saw, lying on the path, a dead rabbit, fresh, its neck broken. It had not been there before. She looked around. She saw nothing, but she understood the dog, or something the dog had scared up. This was the repayment. Not in coin, in protein, in survival. She picked up the rabbit. It was warm. She put it in her sack with the wool. This was the economy of the overlooked. It operated on trust, on observation, on the unspoken rule that help given is help remembered. It was inefficient. It was unreliable, but it was real. Ilara returned to the hut with the wool and the rabbit. The witch took the rabbit without comment, skinned it, added it to the pot. That night the broth had meat in it. It was a richer, deeper flavor. Ilara ate it, understanding the chain that brought it to her bowl. The dog, the trap, her knife, the rabbit on the path. It was a different kind of system, not one of control but of reciprocity. It was messy, it was uncertain. But it had fed her. Ilara slept that night with a full stomach for the first time in weeks. The wool was gathered, the skill was being built, the network was alive. She was no longer just a student. She was a node in a wider, quieter web, and that web, though invisible, was strong. The days began to blur into a rhythm: clean, spin, dye, weave. The small sample frames gave way to longer, more complex patterns. Ilara's hands, once soft and prone to bleeding, were now a map of calluses and faint, colored stains. They knew their work. They could spin a thread so fine it was almost invisible, yet strong enough to lift a small stone. They could mix dyes to produce a shade of green, the exact color of the forest canopy in spring. They could throw the shuttle with a smooth, practiced motion, the beat of the weft becoming as natural as her own heartbeat. This was relief, the slow, sensory grounding in the quiet virtue of acquired skill. The personal layer where the ordeal becomes routine and the routine becomes mastery. The hut was no longer a place of terror. It was a workshop. The smell was familiar: wool, dye, herbs, the faint, ever-present smoke from the fire. The sounds were the music of her labor, the whir of the wheel, the clack of the shuttle. The witch's occasional, dry instructions, they were not friends, they were colleagues in the craft. The witch's face remained in shadow, but her hands were often visible, demonstrating a tricky knot, testing the tension of a warp. Sorting through a new batch of plants for dye, there was a kind of respect in the silence. It was the respect of one practitioner for another who is finally, after much struggle, not entirely incompetent. One afternoon, the witch did not give her a task. She pointed to the great loom in the center of the room. It had sat there, silent and imposing, since Ilara arrived. Now the witch said, "You will dress the loom." This was a major operation. It involved measuring out the long warp threads, hundreds of them, and threading them through the heddles and the reed with perfect precision. A single mistake would ruin the entire piece. It was a test of everything she had learned about thread, about tension, about patience. They worked together in a wordless coordination. Ilara measured and cut the threads. The witch guided them through the complex apparatus of the loom. The process took hours. The light from the window moved across the floor, painting the threads with gold as they were laid in place. The smell of the new warp, the clean linen and wool, filled the air. The sound was the soft whisper of threads sliding through wood, the occasional snap as a knot was tied. This was the emotional core of the relief chapter, not a moment of triumph, but a moment of shared, focused labor. It was a kind of conversation without words. A passing of the torch, the witch was showing her the heart of the machine. The village loom had been a tool, this loom was an instrument. And she was being taught how to tune it. When the last thread was in place, the loom stood dressed, a harp of potential. The pattern was not yet set. That would be the next and final lesson. But the foundation was laid. The witch stepped back. She looked at Ilara, and for the first time Ilara saw a flicker of something in the shadowed face. Not warmth, not approval, acknowledgement. The system had processed the input. The student was ready for the final synthesis. The witch went to the hearth, stirred the pot. The smell of rabbit stew, rich and savory, filled the hut. She ladled out 2 bowls. She handed one to Ilara. They ate in silence, sitting on the floor by the great, silent loom. The stew was hot, the meat tender. It was the best meal Ilara had ever tasted. Not because of the flavor, because of what it represented, a shared meal, a break in the relentless instruction, a moment of simple human sustenance. This was the quiet virtue, fully realized. It was not about kindness to a dog. It was about the respect earned through shared struggle. The witch had not softened. She had simply recognized that the struggle was now a joint project. The obstacle, the terrifying loom, was no longer a barrier. It was the instrument, and Ilara was no longer just a student. She was an apprentice. There was a difference. A student receives knowledge. An apprentice applies it, under the master's eye, to a real work. After the meal, the witch did not send her to spin or clean. She pointed to a pile of sketches on a low table, patterns. Complex, swirling, intricate patterns that made the merchant's tapestry look like a child's drawing. "These are the languages of cloth," the witch said. Her voice was still dry, but it held a new weight. "Choose one, you will weave it." Ilara looked through the sketches. They were beautiful and intimidating. She chose one. It was a pattern of interlocking leaves and vines, with a single, stylized bird at the center. It spoke to her of the forest, of growth, of a quiet kind of freedom. The witch nodded. She did not smile, but she nodded. "Tomorrow you begin." The relief chapter ends here. The grounding is complete. The skills are integrated. The relationship is established. The loom is dressed. The pattern is chosen. The final test awaits. But for now, there is the quiet satisfaction of a full stomach, a task understood, and a craft that is no longer a mystery, but a challenge to be met. The weaving began. It was slow. It was meticulous. Each thread had to be chosen from the correct spool. Each color transition had to be planned 3 rows ahead. The pattern was a language, and Ilara was learning to speak it with her hands. The first few inches were a struggle. The leaves were clumsy, the vines uneven. She unpicked her work, started again. This was not like the sample. This was the real thing. The witch watched, but did not intervene. She was a silent guardian of the standard. The standard was perfection, not the merchant's signal of perfection, real perfection. The cloth itself, in its structure, its color, its integrity. This is analysis at the systemic layer. We examine the moment of earning the fire, the power. In the tale of Vasilisa, the witch gives her a skull with fire in its eyes. The fire burns the stepmother's house. This is not magic. It is a metaphor for earned competence. The fire is the ability to produce work of such quality that it exposes the shoddiness of the old system. It burns down the house of lies. Ilara's fire was being woven, thread by thread, into the cloth. As she worked, her understanding deepened. She was not just following a pattern, she was solving a continuous, three-dimensional puzzle. The tension of the warp, the thickness of the weft, the interaction of the dyes, they all had to be balanced. A mistake in one area could compound into a flaw 10 rows later. The system of the loom was a feedback loop. Her hands were the input. The growing cloth was the output, and the witch's silent presence was the quality control. The fast pacing returns, cut to the mechanism. The village system had given her an impossible output with no control over the inputs. The witch's system gave her total control over the inputs and demanded an impossible output. The difference was agency. In the village, failure was predetermined. Here, failure was a teacher. Each unpicked row taught her something new about the relationship between thread and tension, between color and light. After a week, something shifted. The clumsy leaves began to look like leaves. The uneven vines began to flow. Her hands moved with a new confidence. They knew the loom, they knew the thread, they knew the pattern. They were not just executing, they were creating. The witch saw it. She said nothing. But one evening, as Ilara was banking the fire for the night, the witch went to a locked chest in the corner. She opened it with a key from a chain around her neck. Inside were tools, not magical tools, exceptional tools, a shuttle made of bone, polished smooth by use. A set of heddles made of fine, flexible wire, a reed with teeth so closely spaced they could weave thread as fine as spider silk. She took out the bone shuttle. She handed it to Ilara. Use this. It is balanced. Ilara took it. It was lighter than her wooden shuttle. It felt like an extension of her hand. This was the fire, not a flaming skull, a better tool. Given not as a gift, but as an investment, the witch was investing in the work. She saw that the student had reached a level where the tool would make a difference, where the quality of the output justified the quality of the input. This is the systemic reward. Competence earns better tools enable greater competence. It is a virtuous cycle. The village system hoards the good tools. It gives them based on seniority, on favor, on politics. The witch's system allocates them based on demonstrated ability. The bone shuttle was a vote of confidence. It said, "You are ready for this, now prove it." For the young adult in the modern system, this is the moment of leverage, the promotion to a role with real authority, the access to a better budget. The introduction to a key mentor, the grant for your research. These are the bone shuttles. They are not given lightly. They are given when you have demonstrated, through grueling, unglamorous work, that you will not waste them, that you will use them to produce something of value. Ilara used the bone shuttle. The next section of the weave was smoother, faster, more precise. The tool did not do the work for her. It amplified her skill. It removed a layer of friction. This is the true nature of power, not domination over others, mastery over your craft. The ability to make the world conform to your will through skill, through understanding, through the right tool applied at the right time. The witch's fire was not destructive, it was creative. It was the heat of the forge that tempers the blade. Ilara was the blade, the loom was the forge. The pattern was the template, and the growing tapestry was the proof. She worked late into the night, the bone shuttle flashing in the candlelight, the cloth growing under her hands. It was beautiful. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever made. It was not for a merchant, it was not for a dignitary, it was for the witch, it was her tuition, it was her final exam, and it was her weapon. Because when she returned to the village, she would not need to weave the merchant's impossible tapestry. She would have woven something better. Something born of clean wool and bloody hands and patient skill, something that would make the merchant's demand look like what it was, a cheap imitation. A signal without substance. That was the fire. It would burn down the house of her old life, not with flames, but with comparison. With the undeniable evidence of what real work looks like, the analysis is complete. The fire has been earned, it is woven into the cloth. It sits in her hand as a bone shuttle, it lives in her mind as a deep understanding of her craft. The systemic layer has delivered its reward. The initiation is nearly over. All that remains is to finish the weave and to return home, armed. The tapestry was finished, the last thread was woven, the last knot tied, the last edge hemmed. Ilara cut it from the loom. The cloth fell into her hands, heavy, supple, alive with color and pattern. The leaves and vines seemed to move in the flickering firelight. The bird at the center had a watchful, knowing eye. She held it up. It was perfect, not the perfection of no mistakes, the perfection of integrity. Every thread was where it was meant to be. Every color had depth. The fabric was strong, even, beautiful. This was integration. Connecting the dots between the person she was and the person she had become, the personal layer where the new psychology settles. The slow pacing allows for the feeling of the transformation. She looked at her hands. They were still stained, still calloused, but they were no longer the hands of a victim. They were the hands of a maker. They had taken raw, dirty wool and turned it into this. They had solved 10,000 small problems. They had learned a language. The fear that had lived in her chest, the tight anxiety of the impossible task, was gone. In its place was a quiet, solid confidence. She knew what she could do. She knew the cost. She knew the process. The witch came over. She took the tapestry. She examined it, inch by inch, holding it close to her eyes, feeling the weave with her fingertips. She was silent for a long time. Then she handed it back. "It is good." 2 words. They were worth more than all the praise in the village. They were a professional judgment. The work met the standard. The integration deepened. Ilara was no longer a student seeking approval. She was a craftswoman whose work had been validated by a master. The relationship had completed its cycle. The witch went to the chest again. This time she took out a small, carved wooden box. She opened it. Inside, on a bed of faded velvet, lay a set of tools. The bone shuttle, the fine wire heddles, the close-spaced reed, and a new tool, a pair of shears, their blades sharp and bright. "Take them," the witch said. "You have earned them, they are yours." Ilara took the box. It was not a gift, it was a graduation. The tools were the physical manifestation of her competence. They were the fire, now hers to keep. The witch pointed to the door. "It is time for you to go. Your work here is done." There was no sentimentality, no farewell. The system had processed her. It had input a desperate girl and output a competent weaver. The transaction was complete. Ilara packed her few belongings, the wooden box of tools. Her old cloak now smelling of smoke and herbs, the remains of her journey bread, long since stale. She folded the tapestry carefully, wrapped it in an oilcloth to protect it from the damp. She stood at the door of the hut. She looked back. The witch was already at the loom, threading a new warp, her back turned. The lesson was final. Do not linger. The work is what matters. The maker moves on to the next project. Ilara stepped outside. The clearing was the same, the black pond, the bare earth, the silent trees, but she was different. The forest was no longer a place of terror. It was a place of resources. She knew how to find water. She knew which plants could dye wool. She knew how to move quietly. She had been forged here. The integration of her new self with the world was seamless. She was not returning to the village as a conqueror, she was returning as a different person. The old Ilara, the one who trembled at the loom, was gone. She had died in the hut, her blood staining the wool, her failures unpicked one by one. This new Ilara carried the tools and the tapestry and the knowledge. For the young adult listener, this integration is the moment after the ordeal. After the degree is earned, after the business is launched, after the certification is passed, the external markers are there, the diploma, the revenue. The badge, but the real change is internal, the shift in identity. You are no longer an aspiring something. You are that thing, a programmer, a writer, a chef. A weaver, the confidence is not arrogance. It is the quiet certainty that comes from having done the hard thing, from having survived the initiation. You know the cost, you respect the craft, and you are no longer afraid of the market's impossible standards, because you have your own standards now. Higher ones. Ilara walked away from the hut. She did not look back. The path through the forest was familiar. Her steps were sure. She carried the tapestry, the proof of her transformation. She carried the tools, the means of her future work. And she carried the fire not in a skull, but in her mind, in her hands, in the memory of the perfect thread, the balanced shuttle. The witch's two-word verdict, it is good, the integration is complete, the dots are connected. The personal journey, the systemic training, the historical initiation, they have all converged to produce this moment. A woman walking out of the woods, changed, ready. The obstacle was not a barrier. It was the only way to get the weapon she needed, and she had it now. She held it in her hands. It was a tapestry, and it was a blade. The town looked smaller. The cobblestones were the same, the houses were the same, the smell of wood smoke and baking bread was the same. But Ilara saw it with new eyes. This is analysis at the societal layer. We examine the return. The hero comes back to the system that cast her out, but she is no longer of that system. She sees its architecture. The town was a machine for the production of comfort and the maintenance of hierarchy. The merchant's house was the largest, its timbers stained dark, its windows clean. The weavers' cottages were smaller, huddled together, their looms visible through open doors. The sound was the familiar clatter of daily life. The blacksmith's hammer, the cart wheels on stone, children's voices, but beneath it Ilara heard the other sound, the sound of the machine. The quiet hum of obligation, of debt, of social expectation. The stepmother's house was at the edge of the square. It looked shabby, the paint was peeling, the door hung slightly crooked. It was a house that consumed resources and produced nothing but bitterness. Ilara stood in the square, the wrapped tapestry under her arm, the box of tools in her hand. She did not go to the house first, she went to the merchant's. This was the societal analysis in action. She was not returning to beg forgiveness. She was returning to renegotiate her position within the system. From a position of strength. The merchant's clerk looked at her with vague recognition. She was the girl who had run away from the impossible task. He was about to dismiss her when she unwrapped a corner of the tapestry. The clerk's eyes widened. He called for the merchant. The merchant was a stout man with careful eyes. He looked at the tapestry. He touched it. He held it up to the light. He was silent for a long moment. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "I wove it," Ilara said. Her voice was calm. It did not tremble. The merchant looked at her hands, at the stains, at the calluses. He looked back at the tapestry. He understood. The impossible task had not broken her. It had sent her to find a better teacher. And she had returned with a product that made his original demand look amateurish. This was the societal conflict, but not as a fight, as a market transaction. The gluttonous villain in this case was not a person but a function, the function of extracting maximum value for minimum cost. The merchant represented that function. He wanted what she had built, not to destroy it, to own it, to sell it, to profit from it. How much, he asked, Elara had not thought of a price. She had thought only of proving she could do the work, but the system spoke in prices, so she named one. It was high. It was the price of a master weaver's work, plus the price of her tuition in the woods, plus the price of her silence about the original, exploitative demand. The merchant hesitated. He calculated. The tapestry was exquisite. It would impress the dignitary far more than the original commission would have. It would enhance his reputation. It was worth the price. He agreed. He counted out the coins. They were heavy, cold, real. Elara took them. She did not feel triumph. She felt a cold, clear satisfaction. The system had acknowledged her value on her terms. This was the twist. She did not fight with a sword. She fought with her trade. She presented a product of such undeniable quality that the system had to pay for it. The societal analysis reveals the trap being set, not by her, but by the system's own logic. The merchant's greed for profit, for status, made him vulnerable. He saw the tapestry as a commodity. He did not see it as a weapon, but it was. It was evidence that his system of exploitation was unnecessary. That quality could be produced without breaking the worker, that the impossible task was a fiction designed to hide his own lack of vision. Elara left the merchants with the coins in a pouch at her belt. She walked across the square to the stepmother's house. The societal layer shifted. This was not about market transactions. This was about domestic power. The stepmother was in the doorway, her arms crossed. She had heard, no doubt, that Elara was back and had been to the merchants. Her face was a mask of resentment and calculation. "Where have you been?" she said. Her voice was sharp. Learning, Elara said. She did not elaborate. She looked past the stepmother into the house. The loom still stood in the corner. The half-finished, terrible tapestry was still on it, gathering dust. It was a monument to failure, but it was not her failure anymore. It was the stepmother's failure. The failure of a system that demanded results without providing the means to achieve them. Elara took out a few of the coins. She handed them to the stepmother. "For my keep," she said, "until I leave." The stepmother took the coins, her fingers closing over them quickly. She looked at Elara, at her stained hands, at her calm face. She understood that the balance of power had shifted. Elara was not a dependent anymore. She was a tenant, paying her way. The societal analysis is complete. The return has happened. The hero has re-entered the system, but on new terms. She has used the weapon of her competence to extract value from the economic layer. She has used the weapon of her independence to neutralize the domestic layer. The trap is not yet sprung, but the stage is set. The villain in both forms, the merchant and the stepmother, are still driven by their greed. The merchant wants more tapestries. The stepmother wants more coins. They will return. They will want what she has built, her skill, her time, her freedom, and she will be ready. Because she has the fire, not to burn them, to illuminate the choice. You can have quality, but you must pay for it. You can have obedience, but you must earn it. The old system does not understand this language. It only understands taking, so it will take. And in taking, it will set its own trap. Elara stepped into the house. It smelled of dust and old cabbage. It was no longer her prison. It was a temporary lodging. She had the coins, she had the tools, she had the skill, and she had a plan. The societal examination is over. The machine has been observed. Its levers have been pulled. Now we wait for it to turn. The house was a museum of her old life. The smell was the same. Dust, old cabbage, the faint, sour scent of mildew from a corner where the roof leaked. The sound was the stepmother's voice, a constant, low commentary of complaint and calculation, now tinged with a new, greedy curiosity. The touch of everything was familiar, the rough wood of the table, the cold iron latch on the door, the scratchy wool of the blanket on her old bed. This was relief, the sensory grounding in the atmosphere of the confrontation, the personal layer where the past is felt in the bones, not just remembered. Elara moved through the rooms with a detached calm. She cleaned her old corner, set up her box of tools on a shelf, hung her cloak on a peg. She was a guest in a place that had once been her prison. The difference was in her body. She did not hunch, she did not hurry. She moved with the deliberate, economical grace she had learned at the loom. Every action had purpose. Every resource was accounted for. The stepmother watched her, her eyes narrow. She saw the coins in the pouch. She saw the fine tools. She saw the calm. It made her uneasy. It made her hungry. "What will you do now?" the stepmother asked, her voice pretending concern. "I will weave," Elara said. She did not say for whom or for how much. She opened her box, took out the bone shuttle, ran her thumb along its smooth curve. The stepmother's eyes fixed on it. "That is a fine tool," she said. "Where did you get it?" "I earned it," Elara said. She offered no more. The silence that followed was thick with unasked questions. The stepmother's greed was a physical presence in the room. It smelled like old perfume over sweat. It sounded like the tap of her fingernails on the table. It felt like the pressure of her stare. Elara ignored it. She went to the old loom in the corner. She looked at the half-finished, terrible tapestry. The threads were frayed. The colors were muddy. The pattern was a confused mess. It was a perfect symbol of the old system. All demand, no skill. She took it down, she cut the threads, salvaged what little usable yarn there was, and rolled the rest into a ball for kindling. The stepmother gasped. "That was the merchant's commission. It is gone," Elara said. "I will pay the debt." She did not say she already had with the new tapestry. She let the stepmother think the coins were for that. Let her think the debt was still a lever. It was the first thread of the trap. Elara cleaned the loom. It was a poor thing, warped and loose-jointed, but it would serve for now. She dressed it with a new warp, using her fine threads from the witch's hut. The process was slow, methodical. The stepmother watched, fascinated and resentful. She had never seen anyone work with such focus, such quiet certainty. The sound of the threads sliding through the heddles was a soft, relentless music. The smell of the new linen warp was clean and sharp, cutting through the stale air of the house. This was the setting of the stage, not with dramatic speeches, with the specific details of her trade. The loom, once an instrument of torture, was being reclaimed, transformed. The stepmother could not understand the skill involved. She could only see the potential value. "How long will this one take?" she asked. "As long as it needs," Elara said. She began to weave. Not the merchant's pattern, a simpler one, a pattern of her own design, geometric, clean, strong. She used the bone shuttle. It flashed in the light from the window, a pale sliver of captured competence. The stepmother watched the growing cloth. It was even, it was beautiful in a stark, honest way. It was obviously worth money. Her greed crystallized. She wanted that shuttle, she wanted that skill, she wanted the coins it would bring, but she did not want to do the work. She never had. This was the core of the villain's psychology, the desire for the product without the process, for the fire without walking through the forge. Elara knew this. She had counted on it. She wove through the afternoon, the light faded, she lit a candle, the small flame danced, throwing the loom's shadow, huge and wavering, on the wall. The stepmother sat by the hearth, pretending to mend, but her eyes never left the shuttle. The sound was the beat of the weft, the stepmother's restless sigh, the wind outside. The smell was candle wax, wool, and the stepmother's slow simmering avarice. This was the relief chapter. It grounded the listener in the tense, quiet atmosphere before the trap is sprung. It let them feel the weight of the stepmother's gaze, the cool certainty in Elara's hands, the growing tension in the dusty air. It was not action. It was anticipation. The trap was not yet set, but the materials were all there, the greedy villain, the valuable skill, the tools that represented that skill, and the hero's perfect understanding of both her craft and her enemy. Elara wove until her eyes grew heavy. She put the shuttle away, banked the fire, went to her corner. The stepmother was still awake, watching her. "Good night," Ilara said. Her voice was neutral. The stepmother did not reply. The relief chapter ends in the dark, with two women lying awake under the same roof, separated by a chasm of understanding, one dreaming of coins, the other waiting for the dream to become a snare. The sensory details have done their work. The listener can smell the trap being built. It smells like wool and wax and human want. The merchant returned, not for the old debt, for the new product. He had sold the tapestry to the dignitary. It had been a sensation. Now he wanted more. He came to the house, his manner polite, his eyes calculating. He saw the new cloth on the loom. He saw the bone shuttle. He saw Ilara's calm competence. He made an offer, an exclusive contract. He would supply the materials, she would weave, he would pay her a wage. It was a good offer by village standards. Steady work, steady income. It was also a cage. It would make her a dependent again, a highly skilled, well-paid dependent, but a dependent nonetheless. Her output would belong to him. Her time would be his. The stepmother, listening from the doorway, saw her chance. She saw the wage. She saw her own cut of it. She added her voice. "It is a generous offer," she said. "You should take it. Security is important." The trap had two jaws, the merchant's greed for product, the stepmother's greed for reflected income. Both wanted to own Ilara's skill without understanding it. Ilara listened. She did not say yes. She did not say no. She asked a question. "What is the wage for a master weaver's work?" she asked. She named a figure. It was high. It was the wage of a guild master, not a household dependent. The merchant hesitated. He calculated. The quality of her work justified it. The demand from the dignitary's circle promised more sales. He could afford it. He agreed. But he said, "You must use my materials, my patterns, my deadlines." Ilara nodded. She agreed, but she added a condition. "One piece of my own design from my own materials per season, to keep my hand in." The merchant frowned. He did not like it. It was a loss of control. But the profit from the other pieces outweighed it. He agreed. The contract was struck, not with a handshake, with a written agreement. Ilara could read a little. She made him write it down. The stepmother watched, her eyes glittering. She saw the wage. She did not see the clause, the one piece of her own design. That was the seed of the trap. The merchant left satisfied. The stepmother began to plan how to spend the wage. Ilara went back to the loom. She began weaving the merchant's first commission. It was a simple border pattern. She wove it perfectly, efficiently, but her mind was on the other piece. The one piece of her own design. She began to plan it. It would be a tapestry of the forest, of the hut, of the witch, of the journey. It would tell the story of her initiation. It would be woven with threads dyed from forest plants, with wool cleaned by her own hands. It would be her fire made permanent. And she would hang it in the house where the stepmother would see it every day, a constant reminder of where the skill came from, of what the stepmother's system could not provide, of the price that was paid. Ilara wove, the shuttle flew, the cloth grew, the trap was set, the bait was taken. Now she waited for the spring. The season turned. Ilara delivered the merchant's commissions on time, each piece flawless, each payment collected. The stepmother took her share, her resentment tempered by the steady flow of coins. The house grew a little cleaner, the food a little better, but the atmosphere remained a thin veneer of civility over deep rot. Ilara worked on her own piece in the evenings by candlelight after the merchant's work was done. It grew slowly, a secret garden of thread and memory. This is integration, connecting the dots between the historical pattern and the present justice. The historical layer, where we see the long view of how the oppressed use the master's tools. The slow pacing allows the connection to form. The tales are full of this. The clever tailor uses the king's own vanity to sew him a suit that reveals his nakedness. The cook serves the ogre a feast that puts him to sleep. The weaver in our story uses the contract, the wage, the demand for her skill to create a space for her own truth. This is not revenge as violence. It is justice as revelation. The villain is not stabbed. He is shown a mirror, and in his own greed he fails to recognize himself. The historical integration reveals the mechanism. The powerless cannot overthrow the powerful by force. The powerful have the swords, the laws, the walls. But the powerful have a weakness. They believe their own story. They believe their wealth is proof of their virtue. Their control is proof of their right. The hero's weapon is to create a counter-story, one so compelling, so beautifully made, that it cracks the foundation of the villain's narrative. Elara's tapestry was that counter-story. It showed the forest, it showed the hut. It showed the witch not as a monster, but as a teacher. It showed the journey, the bloody hands, the patient skill. It showed that the value in the room, the real value, was not in the merchant's coins or the stepmother's house. It was in the knowledge earned through ordeal. When she finished it, she hung it on the wall of the main room. It was not large, but it dominated the space. The colors were deep forest greens, earthy browns, the clear blue of a winter sky. The witch's hut was a small, precise knot of threads, radiating a quiet power. The bird at the center, the same bird from her first tapestry, watched with an eye that seemed to follow you. The stepmother saw it. She did not understand it. She saw only that it used fine threads, that it must have taken time, that it was not producing immediate coin. "Why did you make that?" she asked, her voice sharp. "It is my piece," Elara said, "under the contract." The stepmother could not argue, but she resented it. It was a claim on space, on attention, on a kind of value she could not quantify. It made her house feel like it belonged to someone else. The merchant saw it on his next visit. He stopped, examined it. His merchant's mind calculated the hours, the materials, the potential price. But something else flickered in his eyes, a recognition of a different order of work. "This is not my pattern," he said. "It is mine," Elara said. "As per our agreement." The merchant nodded slowly. He understood the clause now. He had agreed to it. He could not complain, but he felt unease. This tapestry was better than anything he had commissioned. It had a soul. It told a story his patterns did not. It was a quiet rebuke to his entire business model, which was based on copying old designs for new money. The integration is complete. The historical pattern of the counter-narrative has been made manifest in thread and dye. The villain's tools, the contract, the demand for skilled labor, have been used to create the thing that will unravel them, not by breaking the contract, by fulfilling it so perfectly that its limitations are exposed. The stepmother's greed for comfort is undermined by the presence of an artifact of hardship and growth. The merchant's greed for product is undermined by the presence of a piece that transcends product, that is art, that is testimony. For the young adult listener, this integration connects their own struggle to history. Your side project, your personal blog, your volunteer work, your carefully honed skill that your employer does not own, these are your counter-narratives. They are the tapestries you weave in the evening. They tell a different story about who you are and what you value. They may not bring immediate money, but they hold a different kind of power. The power to redefine your worth outside the system's metrics, the power to attract allies who see the same story, the power to eventually walk away because you have built something that is yours. Elara looked at the tapestry on the wall. It was done, the integration was done, the historical dots were connected. The weapon was not just the skill. It was the story the skill could tell, and the story was now hanging on the wall in the heart of the enemy's territory. Silent, beautiful, lethal. The fall was not yet, but the ground had been prepared. The historical truth was now present in the room. And the truth, as the old tales know, has a weight of its own. It waits, it watches, and eventually the house that is built on lies cannot bear its gaze. The collapse began with a whisper. A visitor came to the merchant, a noblewoman from the dignitaries' circle. She had seen the first tapestry, the one of leaves and vines. She had heard of the weaver. She wanted a piece for herself, not a copy, something unique. Something with a story. The merchant, eager for the commission and the higher price it would command, came to Ilara. He described the noblewoman's request. He expected her to be pleased, more work, more money, but Ilara listened, and then she shook her head. "I cannot weave her story," she said. "I can only weave mine." The merchant was confused. He offered more money. Ilara pointed to the tapestry on the wall. "That is my story," she said. "If she wants that story, she can have a copy, but it will not be the same. The threads will be different. The hands will be different." The merchant did not understand. He saw only product. He pressed. Ilara stood firm. She had the contract. The one piece of her own design was hers. She would not sell it. She would not copy it for a higher price. It was not for sale. The merchant left frustrated. The noblewoman was disappointed. She went to another weaver, a guild master in the next town. She described what she wanted. The guild master, a proud man, heard of Ilara's refusal. He saw an opportunity. He would weave a piece for the noblewoman, a grand piece, and prove that the girl in the backwater town was not so special after all. He began to work. But his work, though skilled, lacked the depth, the quiet intensity of Ilara's. It was technically perfect, but it was empty. The noblewoman compared it to the memory of Ilara's tapestry on the merchant's wall. She was not satisfied. Word spread. The merchant's exclusive contract, which had seemed a cage, now became a liability. His best weaver would not produce on demand. She had her own standards, higher than his. The stepmother, hearing of the refused commission, was furious. She saw lost coins. She confronted Ilara. "Why did you refuse?" she demanded. "It was more money." Ilara looked at her. "It was not my story to tell," she said. The stepmother did not understand stories. She understood only coins. The rift widened. The merchant, feeling his control slip, came with a new offer. He would buy the tapestry on the wall. "Name your price," he said. Ilara looked at the tapestry, at the forest, the hut, the witch. She looked at her hands. "No," she said, "it is not for sale. It is a record." The merchant, desperate, made a threat. He would enforce the contract. He would demand more work, stricter deadlines. Ilara listened. Then she took out the written agreement. She pointed to the clause. "One piece of my own design per season." She had fulfilled the contract. She had delivered all his commissions. She owed him nothing more. The merchant was trapped by his own greed. He had agreed to the clause to get her skill. Now the clause protected her. He could not break it without breaking the contract and losing her entirely. He left defeated. The stepmother, seeing the merchant's defeat, saw her own source of coins threatened. In a rage, she went to the tapestry on the wall. She would take it down. She would sell it herself. She reached for it. Ilara did not stop her. She watched. The stepmother's fingers touched the cloth, and then she stopped. She looked at it, really looked, for the first time. She saw the detail, the thousands of tiny, perfect knots, the colors that seemed to breathe, the story of hardship and mastery woven into every thread. She saw her own reflection in the bird's watchful eye. She saw the poverty of her own life, the smallness of her greed, compared to the vast, quiet competence in the cloth. Her hand fell. She could not touch it. It was too real. It was too true. It accused her without words. She turned and left the room. She left the house. She did not come back that night. The collapse was complete. The villain had destroyed herself through her own greed. The merchant's greed for control had led him to a contract that gave the hero autonomy. The stepmother's greed for coins had led her to a moment of confrontation with a truth she could not bear. The system had not been overthrown. It had been outgrown. Ilara stood in the quiet house. The smell of dust and old cabbage was still there, but it was fading. The sound was the wind outside and the absence of the stepmother's voice. The touch of the air was clean. She had not fought with a sword, she had fought with her trade, and she had won, not a victory of domination, a victory of integrity. The personal analysis reveals the aftermath, not just happiness, peace. The peace that comes from knowing your own worth, from having a skill that cannot be taken, from having told your story in a form that will outlast your enemies. Elara packed her tools, she took the tapestry from the wall, she left a portion of her coins on the table for the stepmother if she returned. Then she walked out of the house, she did not look back. She walked to the edge of the town to a small, empty cottage she had bought with her savings. It had a good light, a strong floor, space for a proper loom. She hung the tapestry on the wall. She set up her tools, she began to weave, not for a merchant, not for a stepmother, for herself, for anyone who wanted a piece of a true story. The analysis is complete, the cost has been tallied, the weapon has been used, the result is not a kingdom, it is a workshop, it is not happily ever after. It is peace restored through wisdom. The wisdom that the terrifying obstacle was not a barrier, it was the only way to get the weapon she needed, and now she had it. And she would never be without it again. The cottage has a stone floor. The light from the east window is clear and strong in the morning. The loom is set up there. It is a good loom bought with saved coins. The tools are arranged on a shelf. The bone shuttle, the wire heddles, the close-spaced reed, the sharp shears. They are clean, they are ready. The tapestry hangs on the west wall. The forest greens, the earthy browns, the watchful bird. It does not move, it is cloth. It is evidence. Elara rises at dawn, she builds a small fire in the hearth. The smell is wood smoke, not cabbage. She eats simple food. She drinks water from her own well. She sits at the loom, she weaves. The sound is the beat of the weft, the shuttle's passage, her own breathing. The cloth grows, it is a new pattern. It is her own. The merchant still works in the town, he has other weavers, they produce adequate cloth, he sells it, he makes a living, he does not speak of her. The stepmother returned to the house, she lives there alone, she spends the coins that were left, she looks at the empty wall where the tapestry hung. She says nothing. The dog is sometimes seen at the edge of the forest. It is still rangy, it has a mate now, they have pups. They do not come into the town. The witch is in the hut. She weaves, she teaches no one, she tends her garden, she lives. The young adults in the audience, the ones facing impossible standards, they have their own looms, their own witches, their own forests. They are cleaning the wool, they are spinning with bleeding fingers, they are negotiating contracts with clauses, they are weaving their one piece. They are building their quiet competence. The core question hangs in the air, unanswered because the answer is in the hands. Is the terrifying obstacle a barrier, or is it the only way to get the weapon you need? The evidence is presented, the loom, the tools. The tapestry on the wall, the cottage with the stone floor, the silent weaver at her work. The story is complete, the manual is written. It is written in calluses and thread and the smell of dye. It says when the system gives you an impossible task, see it for what it is, an invitation to leave, a map to the witch. A curriculum for your own transformation. The weapon is not given, it is earned, it is woven, and once you have it, no one can take it from you. You can sell what you make with it, but you cannot sell the weapon itself, it is yours. The fire is in the hands are at the loom is in the light is morning, the morning is now.